When I was 20 years old, I drove by myself the 846 miles between Abilene, Texas, and Huntsville, Alabama, for a summer internship at a daily newspaper. When I arrived, I had the job, but I had no place to live. Somehow, by the grace of God, I found myself in my new apartment at the end of 2 very long days. My rented furniture had not arrived, so I set up my sleeping bag for the night and I began unpacking the items that I had driven from Texas, and I felt overheated, so I went to the air conditioning unit to turn it on, and it did not work. So I thought, okay, I went into the bathroom to splash some water on my face and discovered that the water heater was also out of commission. I did not have a cell phone in those days. It was a while ago, and so I picked up the landline to call my mom and cry about my situation, and the line was dead. After a fairly sleepless night, I got dressed, unsure of whether I was going to go to work that day or drive straight back to Texas. I went downstairs to my car and discovered that I had a flat tire. So I did what any independent, self-respecting Texan would do. I sat down on the curb and cried. Because I was far from home. Because I was exhausted, because nothing was going right, and because I was in danger of losing sight of the big idea that got me there in the first place. So the big idea serves as the premise of our 8-week worship series, in which we are reading the Bible for understanding. 6 weeks ago, we launched this series with the understanding that the Bible is not just a book, it's a library full of many different types of books. And to guide our study and discussion, we're using this thematic reading plan that's written for our community. You can find that reading plan in our gathering space or in our Morning Star app under resources and sermon resources. Both places are also where you can find this library card. And so you can see the first big idea is written for you in the library card. The Bible's many books point to central truths. This idea can remind us to stay curious when we encounter something in the text that is upsetting or confusing. And you can walk through the big ideas in the library card for weeks 2 through 6. You can see that perhaps on the screen, or you can see it on your own library card, or you can recall it in your own memory. And everything that we have learned today reminds us that God is present in everything, that God's justice and God's wisdom is present in every type of story and in every situation, even in the wilderness. And Olivia has a message here that says, Olivia, you are loved. Yes. From Laura Talley. Thank you, Olivia. Can you go sit with Laura while I finish this part? That's a really good message, Olivia, for us to have in the wilderness, and you might have just given the punchline of the whole sermon. To be quite honest, if you look at that reading plan, we're getting to the point in the plan where we're reaching these books that most people don't want to read because they're difficult. The stories are hard to read, and they speak of difficult times in the lives of the people of God, including long periods of exile. To be exiled is to be expelled or barred from one's native country, typically for political reasons. And our holy text shares with us several stories in which the Hebrew people as a whole were highly disfavored and sorely mistreated by the great empires of the world. So generally speaking, in the Bible, when someone is talking about the people in exile, they're most likely referring to one of two experiences, the Assyrian exile and the Babylonian exile. These are two different episodes of war and captivity and displacement in the history of the Hebrew people, in which many were literally deported from the homes that they had made in the Promised Land to detention centers in foreign lands. Now, I would contend that even though they originally settled in Egypt looking for food, the Hebrew refugees' enslavement in that land would qualify as exile as well. as would their occupation by the Roman government long after they'd settled in that land flowing with milk and honey that God had promised them when they escaped from Egypt. And that's because exile is not just about being displaced in location. It's about a deep dysregulation in the soul. And our Bible is filled with stories of individual people in times of exile. Moses, when he fled to Midian after he killed a man in Egypt. David, as he ran for his life for 13 years when King Saul put a price on his head. Elijah, when he asked God to put him to death after fighting the prophets of Baal. In these three examples and many, many more, the experiences of exile take place in the wilderness. We've already read about the famous wilderness experience of Jesus this morning in Matthew chapter 4. As we prepare to read it again, I would ask you to keep in mind that this episode takes place directly after Jesus is baptized by John in the River Jordan. So you remember, he comes out of the water, a dove descends, and a voice says, "This is my son, whom I love, in him I am well pleased." And this is where we pick up in Matthew 4, 1 through 11. I'll read it again, but this time, listen really carefully for each temptation. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterward he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." But Jesus said to him again, "It is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took Jesus to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, and said to Jesus, "All of these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God, and serve God only." Then the devil left him, and suddenly the angels came and waited on him. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested. There's so much in this story that can grab our attention. The Spirit's leading, the presence and action of the devil, the details of the tests. But it's that 4-letter word, actually it's 5 letters, 5-letter word, then. What's 4? I can't count. It looked like 5 when I, man, y'all. It's 4. I need to trust myself. That 4-letter word, then, that makes all the difference. When did the temptation of Jesus happen? When did it happen? Then, in a sequence of events. After something else really important had happened, the identity of Jesus as the Son of God had been confirmed. That means that Jesus walked into the wilderness grounded in God's love for him, to the point that when he was tempted to take the easy way out for a little relief, he held out for something better. The point of this story is not that Jesus survived the wilderness experience by relying on the power of his divinity, but that he chose to meet the temptation as we do, through his full humanity. Grounded in God's Spirit, he dealt with the 40-day hunger pains and the physical suffering of dehydration and exhaustion and the longing to gain for himself some comfort and some ease. He faced the desires of the instant fulfillment of his own needs, an immediate end to his own suffering, and access to unlimited power and allegiance that would mean he would never have to suffer like that again. These are natural human desires for all of us especially in the wilderness. These are temptations that we all face in the wilderness of our own lives. Instant gratification, avoidance of suffering, self-sufficiency. Geographically speaking, we think of wilderness as an uncultivated, uninhabited, inhospitable region, somewhere we don't want to be, at least not for long. But in the human experience, we can also think of wilderness as a state of being lost, isolated, in a period of transition or struggle. I'm talking about a personal crisis here, the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, the declining health of a partner, the throes of addiction. Wilderness can reside in our souls until we feel our very selves have become uncultivated, uninhabited, inhospitable. No matter who we are, no matter where we are, even if we're a queen in a palace. That's Esther's story of exile. Her ancestors were among those who were carried into exile in Babylon. And generations later, their descendants lived under Persian rule. After the Persian king deposed his wife for publicly defying his command to display her beauty in front of his party guests, he issued a decree that resulted in the trafficking of 400 young women for what amounts to be a beauty contest to name the next queen. Lucky Esther, she won. Somehow no one seemed to notice Esther's ethnic identity, which meant that the king had no idea that he was ordering the genocide of her family. And Esther was in a position from within the palace to try to do something to save her people, but not without risking her own life. So that brings us to the 4th chapter in the book of Esther. I'll be reading verses 12 through 17. At this point, Esther's relative Mordecai is attempting to help her find courage to act on behalf of the people after she has expressed some doubts, understandably. Esther 4:12 through 17. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Don't think that in a king's palace you will escape any more than the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. But who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go and gather the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold fast on my behalf and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do, and after that I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this. Again, timing is everything. And it looks like this time it's all on Esther. So she, like Jesus, grounds herself in her identity as a child of God, and she steels herself for what she has to do for just the chance of saving her people, knowing that her own death was the most likely outcome. Esther's story is a wilderness experience. It's a nightmare of exile, if there ever was one. So where is God in the story? That's always the question in the wilderness, by the way. Where is God? Well, in the story of Esther, God's name is never mentioned, not once. And that's the best lesson that Esther could ever teach us, to look for God in the wilderness, not in the bright center stage of the drama, but behind the scenes, in the shadows, working quietly and subversively. If you didn't catch it the first time, or if you've never read Esther, you won't miss it the next time you read it. God's action in the unexpected reversals in which the underdog comes out on top. and the games of luck or chance that create this unlikely window of opportunity. Esther's story is filled with great human acts of courage and timely revelation of details that change the course of the outcome. And through it all, the covenant that God has made with God's people is upheld. Esther is a masterful work of literature and deserving of our time and our attention because it reveals an important big idea of Scripture. God lives and works in the margins. It's a truth that has the power to reframe our wilderness experiences with hope and expectation. God lives and works in the margins. It's worth writing down. So I encourage you to fill out your library card and write this sentence beside the word wilderness. Because if God is in the margins with the people who are suffering and God calls us to work for justice, then it's in the margins that we should find ourselves too. Displaced from our comfort zones and our illusions of self-sufficiency. As vulnerable as a broke college student 800 miles from home with a flat tire and a barely habitable apartment, Judy, I didn't even have a gato, a cat, to keep me company. Because it feels like all is lost sometimes. But it's when it feels like all is lost that God reveals a way where there seems to be no way. That's the story of the Exodus. That's the story of the return from exile. It's certainly the story of the resurrection of Jesus. And so for next week, let's take a look at some of the stories of renewal in our holy text. Journey through the wilderness of Numbers, perhaps, or read through a retelling of the history in the book of Hebrews, or take another pass through Revelation. But as you do, ask yourself, when do beginnings begin? In the messiness of our lives and the loss and the loneliness of our personal experience of exile, where do beginnings actually begin? As the answer unfolds, we just may come to understand the value of the wilderness, even when we're walking in it. Amen? Amen.